Shedeur Sanders speaks after Browns' loss to Bears. What happens next? Wait, before you judge Shedeur Sanders, you need to hear what this game could mean for his future with the Cleveland Browns. The Browns just opened their 2026 preseason with a brutal 34-10 loss to the Chicago Bears, and once again, all eyes were on the quarterback situation in Cleveland. But here's the part that could get really interesting. Because Shedeur Sanders wasn't just playing for preseason reps, he was playing for his future, and after what happened against Chicago, the pressure around the Browns' quarterback competition just got even bigger. So let's break down what happened, what Sanders showed, and why his next preseason game could be one of the biggest moments of his young NFL career. First, let's set the stage. Coming into this game, the Browns had already made their plan clear. Deshaun Watson would start against the Bears, while Shedeur Sanders was expected to get his opportunity later in the game, and that meant Sanders had a limited window to make an impression. No excuses, no second chances, just a few drives to show the coaching staff that he deserves more opportunities. And that's exactly why this game mattered. The Browns entered the matchup with plenty of questions surrounding the quarterback position. Watson is trying to get his career back on track. Sanders is trying to establish himself as a legitimate NFL quarterback. And Dillon Gabriel is also part of the competition. So every throw matters, every decision matters, and every mistake gets noticed. Now, the game itself definitely didn't go the Browns' way. Cleveland scored just 10 points while Chicago exploded for 34. The Browns struggled offensively, and all three Cleveland quarterbacks were involved in a game where turnovers became a major storyline. And for Sanders, there were some positives, but there were also moments that he would probably like to have back. One of the biggest moments came when Sanders threw an interception that was picked off by Bears defensive back Beanie Bishop Jr. That play immediately started a huge conversation online. Some fans saw it as a young quarterback trying to make a play. Others saw it as exactly the kind of mistake Sanders cannot afford to make when he's fighting for a job. And that brings us to the biggest question. What does Shedeur do next? Because the Browns aren't finished evaluating him. In fact, his next opportunity could be even more important. Cleveland has already announced that Sanders is scheduled to start the second preseason game against the Buffalo Bills, and he's expected to play the first half. Think about that. Against Chicago, Sanders had to come into the game and make an impact. Against Buffalo, he gets a much bigger opportunity. He gets the start, he gets more reps, and most importantly, he gets a chance to control the game from the opening snap. That changes everything. Because if Sanders can respond with a strong performance against Buffalo, the conversation could completely change. Imagine Sanders coming out, moving the ball consistently, making smart decisions, protecting the football, and putting points on the board. Suddenly, the Browns have a much harder decision to make, but if the mistakes continue, then the pressure gets even heavier, and that's why the next game is so important. Sanders doesn't need to be perfect. He needs to show progress. He needs to show that he can read defenses, make quick decisions, command the offense, and most importantly, avoid the mistakes that can cost his team games. And there's another thing Browns fans should be watching. How does Sanders respond to adversity? Because every young quarterback goes through bad games. The great ones are remembered for what they do after those games. And now, Shedeur has the perfect opportunity to answer back. The Bears game is over. The interception is over. The criticism is already happening. But none of that decides his future. The next game does. So now the question is simple. Can Shedeur Sanders bounce back against the Bills and turn this preseason into a statement? Because if he does, this entire quarterback conversation in Cleveland could get very interesting. And trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next. Shedeur Sanders had another important opportunity to show the Cleveland Browns what he can do during the preseason matchup against the Chicago Bears. The Browns entered the game with plenty of questions surrounding their quarterback situation. Deshaun Watson, Shedeur Sanders, and the other quarterbacks on the roster are all trying to make an impression, and every preseason game gives them another chance to prove themselves. For Sanders, this wasn't just about getting a few snaps. It was another chance to show that he belongs in the Browns' long-term plans. The game, however, didn't go the way Cleveland wanted. The Browns were defeated by the Bears 34-10, and the offense struggled to find consistency throughout the matchup. Sanders had some positive moments, but he also experienced the kind of mistakes that young quarterbacks have to learn from. One of the biggest moments came when Sanders threw an interception. That play immediately became a talking point because turnovers are one of the biggest things coaches look at when evaluating a young quarterback. But here's the important part. Sanders still has time to respond. One preseason game isn't enough to decide the future of a quarterback, especially when the player is still developing and learning the speed of the NFL. And Cleveland has already given Sanders another opportunity. His next preseason matchup could be much more important because Sanders is expected to start against the Buffalo Bills. That means he'll have the opportunity to play from the beginning instead of waiting to enter the game later, and that's a completely different situation. Starting a game allows a quarterback to get into a rhythm. It allows him to communicate with the offense from the opening drive, read the defense, and show the coaching staff how he handles pressure before the game gets away from him. For Sanders, this could be the perfect opportunity to bounce back. He doesn't need to throw for 400 yards. He doesn't need to make every single play. What the Browns need to see is improvement. They need to see Sanders make smart decisions, protect the football, deliver accurate passes, and keep the offense moving. And most importantly, they need to see how he responds after making a mistake. That's one of the biggest tests for any young quarterback. Everybody makes mistakes in the NFL. The difference is, what happens next? Does the quarterback lose confidence, or does he come back and make the next play? That's exactly what Browns fans will be watching, because Sanders has already shown that he isn't afraid of pressure. Now he has to show that he can handle it. And there's another reason this situation is so interesting. The Browns aren't just evaluating Sanders in isolation. They're comparing him to the other quarterbacks on the roster. Every good throw matters, every touchdown matters, every turnover matters, and every preseason game gives the coaching staff more information. That's why the next game against Buffalo could be a major moment for Sanders. If he comes out strong, protects the football, moves the chains, and puts points on the scoreboard, the conversation around him could change very quickly. Suddenly, fans could start asking whether Sanders deserves an even bigger role. But if the mistakes continue, the Browns may have to take a different approach, and that's what makes the preseason so important. Nothing is guaranteed. Every player is fighting for his position. Every rep matters. And for a young quarterback like Sanders, these games are a chance to build trust with the coaching staff. So now, after the loss to Chicago, the biggest question isn't what happened against the Bears. The biggest question is what Shedeur Sanders does next. Does he bounce back? Does he learn from the interception? Can he lead the Browns offense? And can he turn his next opportunity into a statement? We're going to find out very soon. And no matter what happens, this is still just the beginning of Shedeur Sanders' NFL story. The pressure is real, but so is the opportunity. So let me know in the comments. Do you think Shedeur Sanders can earn a bigger role with the Browns? And if you're following Shedeur the Browns in the latest NFL news, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. Hit that like button if you want to see Sanders get another opportunity, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Because the quarterback battle in Cleveland is far from over, and Shedeur Sanders still has something to prove. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.